Tonight, we are traveling back to London in the 19th century, not to the London of royal ceremonies, grand exhibitions, or crowded daylight streets, but to the city after sunset. This is the London of gas lamps glowing through smoke, carriage wheels sounding across wet stone, and footsteps disappearing into narrow passages. It is a city that never becomes completely silent. Somewhere, a newspaper press is still turning. Somewhere else, a market porter is beginning work before most households have gone to sleep. On the river, boats continue to move in darkness, guided by memory, sound, and the faintest lights along the shore. The Victorian period lasted from 1837 until 1901, during the reign of Queen Victoria. Across those decades, London changed at extraordinary speed. At the beginning of the 19th century, its population was around 1 million. By the end of the century, Greater London held well over 5 million people. The city expanded far beyond its older boundaries. Railways arrived. New streets were cut through crowded neighborhoods. Gas lamps multiplied, and electric lights appeared near the end of the century. Yet progress was uneven. A bright, modern avenue could stand only a short walk from a court or alley that remained almost completely dark. So settle in, lower the lights, and imagine the rain beginning softly beyond your window. We will enter Victorian London at dusk and remain there until the first pale light of morning. Evening did not arrive everywhere in London at the same moment. In the western districts, the final daylight rested on terraces, parks, clubs, and large private homes. In the commercial center, clerks closed ledgers while messengers hurried through streets still busy with carts. To the east, the sky darkened behind warehouses, docks, workshops, and thousands of chimneys. The air carried many smells at once: coal smoke, horse manure, damp wood, food, leather, hot metal, and the river. London was an industrial city, a port, and a vast collection of neighborhoods pressed together. As daylight faded, the differences between those neighborhoods became more visible. A wealthy household might have several rooms illuminated by gas. Curtains would be drawn, fires tended, and dinner prepared by servants. In a poorer home, a single candle or oil lamp might serve an entire family. Light was valuable, and people used only as much as they could afford. The city's population had grown faster than its housing and infrastructure. The National Archives describes Victorian cities as overflowing, with London facing particularly severe pressure. Families were often divided by only a wall, a thin floor, or a narrow staircase. Sounds traveled easily between rooms: a baby crying, someone coughing, water being carried upstairs, boots being removed after a long shift. Outside, shopkeepers secured shutters. Street sellers counted their remaining coins. Children were called indoors. Church clocks marked the hour, although their bells did not all agree. There was no single Victorian London night. For some, evening meant comfort, books, and quiet conversation. For others, it meant another shift, another search for a bed, or several hours beside a machine that could not be allowed to stop. And above the city, smoke gathered slowly in the cooling air. Before the gas lamps could guide anyone home, someone had to light them. London had seen an early public demonstration of gas street lighting on Pall Mall in 1807. The industry expanded during the following decades, and by the middle of the 19th century, cast iron lampposts had spread across much of the capital. The change was remarkable, but it was never perfectly uniform. Main roads and important commercial streets received better lighting first. Smaller lanes might have fewer lamps, weaker lamps, or none at all. Gas flames were also far softer than modern electric lights. Each lamp created a small island of visibility surrounded by darkness. At dusk, lamplighters followed familiar routes carrying long poles. They opened the supply and ignited each flame. In the morning, they returned to extinguish it. They also cleaned glass, checked fittings, and reported damaged equipment. Imagine following one of them along a wet London street. His boots touch the pavement in a steady rhythm. He pauses beneath a black iron post, raises the pole, and brings the lamp to life. Warm light spreads across the wall of a shop, catches the edge of a hanging sign, and reflects in the shallow water beside the curb. Then he walks on, leaving that small golden circle behind him. Gas lighting changed urban life. Shops could remain open later. Theaters and public buildings became easier to reach after dark. People could travel with slightly more confidence, but the new light had its own atmosphere. Coal gas was manufactured in large industrial works and stored in enormous gas holders that became familiar features of London's skyline. The lamps could flicker in wind. Their glass could become dirty, and their glow rarely reached far into alleys or doorways. Toward the end of the Victorian period, electricity began to appear. Experimental electric street lighting was installed in parts of London from the late 1870s, and larger schemes followed. The electric light seemed brilliant beside gas. For many years, however, old and new existed together. One street might glow with a modern white arc light, while the next still depended on a lamplighter and a row of small flames. Victorian London at night was darker than the modern city, but it was not always quieter. Horse-drawn traffic continued late into the evening. Cab wheels crossed stone and wooden road surfaces. Harnesses moved. Drivers called to one another. A horse might stumble. A cart might stop suddenly, or metal rims might strike an uneven section of road. On wet nights, these sounds softened beneath the rain. Pedestrians listened carefully. Before crossing, they could not rely on bright headlights or painted markings. They watched for lanterns and judged the speed of approaching horses by sound. In busy districts, night brought its own economy. Food sellers remained near theaters and stations. Coffee stalls served workers who needed warmth. Newspaper boys waited for late editions. Porters carried luggage. Cab drivers rested beside their vehicles. Messengers moved between offices, hotels, and private homes. Public houses and music halls released bursts of sound whenever a door opened. A few seconds of conversation, singing, and glassware escaped into the street before the door closed again. Elsewhere, the city felt almost empty. Rows of warehouses could become silent after business hours. Narrow residential streets might show only a weak light beneath a curtain. A churchyard wall, a closed factory, or an unfinished railway cutting could create long areas of darkness. This contrast mattered. Victorian London was often described through extremes: wealth and poverty, illumination and shadow, public display and private hardship. The contrast was not merely literary. It could be observed street by street. Late in the century, Charles Booth and his investigators attempted to document the living and working conditions of Londoners. Their famous poverty maps classified streets by income and social conditions. The maps show prosperous roads beside areas of serious poverty, sometimes separated by only a short distance. At night, those differences could be heard as clearly as they could be seen. The quiet of a large private square was not the quiet of an exhausted lodging house. One suggested space and privacy. The other might conceal dozens of people sleeping close together behind a single front door. While much of London prepared for bed, thousands of people continued working. The city required labor at every hour. At the docks, cargo followed the rhythm of ships and tides. Warehouses received goods from across the world. On the Thames, lightermen moved cargo between ships and shore in flat-bottom boats called lighters. Their work could be dangerous even in daylight. At night, rain, darkness, and fog increased the risk. A late 19th-century lighterman remembered fog as the enemy of river work. When the river disappeared into blackness, hearing became as important as sight. In the markets, activity often began long before dawn. Porters unloaded meat, vegetables, fish, and flowers so that London would wake to full stalls. Bakers worked through the night. Their ovens brought heat into dark streets, while carts waited to carry bread across the city in the morning. Newspaper production also continued after sunset. Editors prepared stories, compositors arranged type, presses turned, and bundles were organized for distribution. A major event could keep an office illuminated all night. Railway workers maintained tracks and signals. Postal employees sorted letters. Nurses watched hospital wards. Servants waited for households returning from dinners, theaters, or railway journeys. Some workers were visible beneath the lamps. Others remained behind factory walls, basement windows, or closed doors. Night labor carried a different sense of time. Instead of measuring the evening by dinner and bedtime, workers measured it by deliveries, furnace temperatures, bells, tides, and the arrival of trains. Dawn was not necessarily the beginning of the day. For many, it was the end of a shift. If you walked through Victorian London after midnight, you might therefore pass from silence into sudden industry. A street would appear deserted. Then a gate would open, revealing a yard filled with carts, lamps, voices, and steam. A few minutes later, the gate would close, and the street would return to darkness. River Thames was London's great working river. It carried people, fuel, food, building materials, and goods from distant ports. Its tides shaped the daily schedules of thousands of workers. At night, the river presented a world of scattered lights. Lanterns moved on decks. Warehouses stood as dark blocks along the bank. Bridges crossed the water in long silhouettes. The sound of the city traveled differently across the open surface. But the Victorian Thames also received enormous quantities of waste. Household sewage and industrial pollution entered the river. During the hot summer of 1858, the smell became so severe that the period was remembered as the Great Stink. Parliament itself could not ignore the condition of the water outside its windows. The crisis accelerated work on a vast sewer system designed by engineer Joseph Bazalgette. Intercepting sewers carried waste away from the central river, and the new embankments reshaped parts of London. The project represented one of the great engineering transformations of the Victorian city. Yet this transformation took time, and the river remained hazardous. For the people working on it at night, fog could be as dangerous as pollution. In dense conditions, boats navigated by bells, voices, and knowledge built over years. A familiar journey could suddenly feel uncertain. Imagine standing on a bridge in the late 19th century. Below, dark water moves with the tide. A small vessel passes beneath you, its lantern briefly visible and then hidden by mist. Somewhere downstream, cargo is being unloaded. Somewhere upstream, another bridge is almost lost in smoke. The river links every part of the city, but it also seems to divide the night into two worlds. On one bank, a theater crowd searches for cabs. On the other, a worker begins a cold shift beside a warehouse door. Between them, the Thames continues toward the sea. No image of Victorian London is more familiar than the gas lamp surrounded by fog. The reality was less romantic. London's famous fog was often smog, natural moisture combined with smoke and pollutants from domestic fires, factories, gasworks, and steam transport. Coal heated homes, powered industry, and helped illuminate the streets. The same fuel also filled the air with particles. The London Museum notes that the city's Victorian atmosphere was known for this mixture, and the Met Office records serious smoke-laden fogs during the 19th century. When conditions trapped polluted air near the ground, visibility could collapse. Buildings faded. Street signs disappeared. A familiar crossing became uncertain. The next lamp might be visible only as a blurred orange patch. People learned to move slowly and listen. On the river, fog was especially dangerous. On land, it disrupted traffic and made navigation difficult even for residents who knew their streets well. The color varied. Some descriptions refer to yellow, brown, or almost black air. The smell of coal smoke remained on clothing and entered buildings through windows and doors. For this journey, imagine a milder fog rather than one of the city's deadly episodes. The street ahead narrows into gray. The nearest lamp shines softly, but the next is barely visible. A cab approaches at walking pace. Its driver leans forward, watching the road. Hooves sound before the horse emerges, then the cab disappears again. Fog transformed distance. 10 meters could feel like the edge of the known city. Sound appeared close, and then far away. A church bell seemed to come from no particular direction. Writers used London fog as a symbol of secrecy, confusion, and moral uncertainty. But for ordinary people, it was also a practical problem. A delay, a danger, an irritation, and sometimes a serious threat to health. The beautiful image of light in mist belonged to the same industrial system that made the air difficult to breathe. The Metropolitan Police was created in 1829, before the Victorian period began. By the time Victoria came to the throne, the uniformed police officer was becoming a familiar figure on London streets. Night patrols followed assigned routes known as beats. An officer learned the doors, yards, shops, alleys, and regular inhabitants of a district. He checked for signs of fire or forced entry, responded to disturbances, and watched the movement of people through the streets. The work relied on observation and memory. There were no radios. Communication was slow. If help was needed, an officer might use a whistle, seek another constable, or send a message to the nearest station. The police did not remove every danger, and their presence was not welcomed equally by all Londoners. Policing reflected the social attitudes and inequalities of the period. Still, the regular beat became part of the city's nighttime rhythm. Late in the century, investigators working for Charles Booth accompanied policemen on their routes. Their notebooks recorded street-level observations later used to revise Booth's maps of wealth and poverty. These records remind us that Victorian London was not simply divided into a wealthy West End and a poor East End. Conditions could change within a few streets. A comfortable road might stand near overcrowded housing, casual lodging, and unstable work. Picture an officer walking beneath the lamps. He tries a shop door. It remains locked. He pauses near an alley and listens. Far away, another whistle sounds, but no second call follows. A bakery window glows at the end of the road. Rainwater runs along the curb. The officer continues. His route will bring him back to the same place later in the night. The buildings will look unchanged, but different windows may be illuminated. Different workers may be passing, and the sky will be slightly closer to dawn. For many Londoners, the central question of the night was not what happened in the street, it was where they would sleep. Victorian housing reflected enormous differences in income. Some families occupied spacious homes with several bedrooms. Others rented one room. In overcrowded districts, a room might hold an entire family or be shared by several unrelated people. Common lodging houses offered beds to those able to pay for a night. Quality and conditions varied greatly. Privacy was limited, and the atmosphere could be noisy even after the lamps were lowered. Purpose-built lodging houses appeared later in the century, including philanthropic projects that attempted to provide cleaner and more organized accommodation. But demand remained large. Charles Booth's survey, conducted between 1886 and 1903, collected information on employment, housing, streets, and household conditions. The surviving notebooks and maps show why general descriptions of the poor can be misleading. London contained many kinds of hardship, many kinds of work, and many strategies for survival. Some families had regular but low wages. Others depended on casual labor that changed from day to day. Illness, injury, or the loss of employment could quickly turn an insecure home into no home at all. At night, a lodging house might contain dock workers, sellers, laborers, travelers, and people between jobs. Boots stood beside beds. Damp coats hung near weak fires. The room held the smell of soap, smoke, wet wool, and tired bodies. This part of London's history should not be turned into decoration. The narrow streets and dim rooms that appear atmospheric in paintings were homes and workplaces. The people inside them experienced friendship, humor, pride in ordinary domestic life, but also crowding, poor sanitation, and insecurity. As we pass these buildings in imagination, we do so quietly. Behind each curtain is a life more complicated than the label placed on a map. Not everyone wanted the night to be quiet. Victorian London supported theaters, music halls, public houses, restaurants, and clubs. Entertainment districts remained active long after shops in other neighborhoods had closed. Music halls offered songs, comedy, dance, and novelty acts. Their audiences crossed social boundaries. Although venues varied greatly in cost and reputation, theaters produced popular dramas, comedies, and spectacular performances. Outside, cab drivers waited for the final curtain. Street sellers offered food. Newspapers advertised performances. Illuminated signs competed for attention, especially later in the century as electric lighting became more common. When a theater emptied, the street changed within minutes. Doors opened. Warm light reached the pavement. Hundreds of people searched for coats, companions, and transport. Conversations overlapped. Horses moved forward. Drivers called destinations. Then the crowd gradually dispersed. Servants and workers remained behind to clean, secure doors, and prepare for the following day. The bright public night gave way to a quieter working night. In clubs and private homes, evenings could continue much later. Dinner, cards, music, and conversation followed schedules made possible by servants, transport, and reliable artificial light. The experience of nighttime leisure therefore depended on money, location, and occupation. One person paid to watch a performance. Another sold food outside it. Another waited with a cab. Another cleaned the building after the audience had gone. Victorian London's nighttime culture was created by all of them. Let us leave the crowded streets and enter an ordinary home. There is no single house that represents Victorian London, so imagine a modest household rather than a mansion or the most overcrowded room. The front door closes against the weather. Damp coats are removed. A small fire provides warmth. Light comes from a gas fitting, an oil lamp, or candles, depending on the home and the decade. Water may need to be carried. Washing is done with bowls and jugs. Fires must be managed safely. Doors are checked, and the final tasks of the day are completed. Victorian bedrooms were not automatically peaceful. Street sounds entered through windows. Neighbors could be heard through walls. Factories and railways affected nearby homes. Coal smoke entered fabrics and settled on surfaces. In colder months, the bedroom might be unheated. Curtains, bed hangings, blankets, and shared beds help preserve warmth. Sleep schedules also followed work. A market worker might rise while others were still awake. A servant could remain available until the household retired. A factory shift, hospital duty, or railway timetable could divide the night in unfamiliar ways, yet many bedtime rituals would still feel recognizable. Clothes were folded. Shoes were placed nearby. A candle was carried from room to room. A book might be read for a few minutes. A final conversation became quieter. Then the flame was extinguished. Without modern screens, street lights, or glowing clocks, darkness inside a room could become nearly complete. The city remained present through sound. A carriage passed. Rain touched the window. Somewhere, a door closed. A distant bell marked an hour that the sleeper might or might not hear. Here, beyond the curtains, London continued to work. By the final decades of the 19th century, the character of the London night was changing again. Electric lighting appeared in streets, stations, public buildings, shops, and wealthy interiors. Early systems were expensive and sometimes unreliable, but the new light was much brighter than older gas flames. Historic England records experimental electric lighting on Holborn Viaduct in 1878. and further schemes in the early 1880s. In 1892, hundreds of arc lamps were installed on major city streets. The effect could be dramatic. A road illuminated by electric lamps looked modern, public, and almost theatrical. Details remained visible at a greater distance. Shop windows became brighter. Important buildings could be displayed after dark, but electricity did not replace gas overnight. The two systems competed and developed together. Gas technology improved, and many districts continued using gas well beyond the Victorian period. Once again, London became a city of contrasts. Modern light illuminated a main road while nearby rooms depended on candles. Electric signs appeared above entertainment venues while a lamplighter continued his route only a few streets away. People living through the change could not know exactly what the 20th century city would become. They could only observe that night was becoming less absolute. Human activity was no longer as tightly limited by sunset, and the commercial city had gained more hours in which to work, travel, sell, and entertain. The darker London was slowly retreating, though it would never disappear entirely. Numbed. It is now close to dawn. The city has not slept, but its rhythm is changing. Theater crowds are gone. Public houses are quiet. Night workers prepare to leave, while market workers and delivery drivers take their places. Bread carts begin their routes. Railway stations receive early passengers. The first newspapers move into the streets. In some homes, servants light fires before the rest of the household wakes. The sky above the rooftops becomes a softer gray. Gas lamps remain visible for a little longer. One by one, lamplighters begin to extinguish them. A flame disappears, leaving only glass and iron against the morning. Shutters open. The river reveals itself again beneath the bridges. Warehouses regain their details. Streets that seemed mysterious in darkness become ordinary routes to work. Victorian London was transformed repeatedly during the 19th century. Its population multiplied. Gas lighting extended the usable day. Police patrols became familiar. Railways, sewers, and embankments changed movement through the city. Electricity arrived. Social investigators attempted to map lives that prosperous London often preferred not to see, and yet the night remained unequal. Light, safety, warmth, privacy, and rest were distributed according to wealth and circumstance. The city's progress was real, but it did not reach every street or every household at the same time. That may be the most important thing to remember about Victorian London after dark. It was not one city, but many cities occupying the same space. A city of brilliant theaters and weak candles. A city of quiet squares and crowded rooms. A city of engineering ambition, polluted water, and smoke-filled air. A city that frightened some people, exhausted many, entertained others, and employed thousands while the rest of the population slept. As morning arrives, our walk comes to an end. The final lamp fades into daylight. The rain has stopped. Wheels begin moving through the streets again, and the great city prepares for another day. For now, you can remain here for a moment longer, beside the quiet river, while Victorian London slowly disappears into the mist. Good night.